Exclusive research obtained by Inside Out has discovered that over a 4-year period, London has only built around a third of the new homes it actually needs. Now that's partly down to the greenbelt that surrounds the capital. That was created, some 60 odd years back as a way of restricting the city's urban sprawl. But with London now facing such a huge shortage of housing, is it time to chuck out the rule book and start building on the belt? We sent our reporter Rachel Royce to find out.
Looking out towards London from the top of this hill near Sevenoaks, it's possible to see the greenbelt stretching out before you. The idea of creating a greenbelt was first discussed in Victorian times. Its aim was to stop London spreading outwards by restricting development. The government finally asked local authorities to come up with boundaries for the greenbelt shortly after the war. They were put in place in the 50s and have remained largely unchanged ever since.
It's beautiful here, isn't it? And that's why most people would say when asked, let's keep the green belt, let's keep Britain beautiful. But nearby in towns and villages, there are some people who may never be able to afford to buy a home in the place that they grew up. And that's why some people are asking, is it time for a change? Is it time to think the unthinkable and build on the green belt? We'll be looking at the arguments for and against.
The green belt isn't just about keeping green spaces, it's about keeping the character of rural villages and towns intact. That makes for some very desirable and expensive properties in the areas surrounding London. 3-bedroom houses that cost £500,000 and more. Professor Paul Cheshire, an expert on housing and the economy at the London School of Economics, says the current green belt policy should be scrapped. He says it's a major factor behind sky-high property prices.
Anybody who's trying to buy a house for the first time knows how serious the housing shortage is in the southeast. Housing is less affordable than at any time since we've had data, that is, the cost of housing relative to people's incomes. To build houses, you need land to put them on. We've been completely starved of that land since 1955. And one of the things which people don't really realise about the green belt is it's not green in the sense of environmentally friendly or recreational opportunities. It's just privately owned land, 40% of which in the London area is in intensive agriculture. A lot of the rest of it is in golf courses, a surprising amount, because land for golf courses is so cheap as a result of them not being able to put houses on the land.
But building on the green belt is not a popular idea.
It protects, rural England really, and I'd like to keep it as it is really.
Well, we need to keep the open spaces just as they were for the, just for the surrounding villages and for everybody to enjoy.
I think it must be preserved for leisure, for good health and for all sorts of reasons.
And the view that the green belt shouldn't be used for new housing is backed up by Dr. Hilary Newport of the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England.
I genuinely think that over the last 60 years it has been the single most important planning policy that shaped the country that we live in today. We're a densely populated and pretty prosperous country, and I think that if we had allowed the same kind of sprawl to continue that we've seen in bits of Northern America, where they've lost some of their most amazingly fertile and productive agricultural land to huge, great sprawling housing and industrial estates, we would be a poorer place for it.
But others, like Professor Cheshire, believe that it is possible to build on the green belt in a small way that would make a massive difference. One idea is to look at building within a 2-kilometre radius of railway stations.
And the suitable land would be that it's within that 2-kilometre area. It's not valuable for other purposes, like it's not a recreational area, it's not an environmentally sensitive area, it's not in an area of outstanding natural beauty, it's not a wildlife site. So it wouldn't be that you want to build on every bit of those 2 kilometres by any means at all.
So in practice, what would his idea look like? We took the Professor and Dr. Hilary Newport to look at a field close to the station at Beltring near Maidstone in Kent. What do they both make of this as a potential site for a new housing development?
So this is a high-intensity field with a railway about 50 yards away and a railway station about 50 yards away, being used for growing rapeseed by the look of it, which is one of the most environmentally destructive crops you can find, and we're desperately short of land to put houses on, this seems like a possible spot that one should be thinking very seriously about.
We'd argue that all greenbelt land is precious. There are, of course, exceptional circumstances in which greenbelt land can be released, particularly for affordable housing. We are all for the delivery of affordable housing, but unsustainable commuting practices are not necessarily the way that we're going to solve the housing crisis that we're suffering from at the moment. London needs a densely populated, livable centre if it's going to provide the services and the access to those services that people really need.
I live in central London, and I can tell you that it's becoming almost impossible for people other than really super rich to buy a house in central London. Where are the firemen who work in central? Where are the teachers? Where are they going to live in central London if we won't provide housing land?
When people think about the greenbelt, they often imagine places like this, beauty spots with views, green fields. But the greenbelt also covers land that's already built on, often brownfield sites.
Many people think building on brownfield sites is the way forward to solve the nation's housing crisis. Yet these sites can be notoriously hard to get planning permission if they're within the green belt with its restrictive blanket policy. This former hospital site near Croydon was derelict for 20 years before planning permission was granted for a massive new housing development.
They're putting in foundations for a 3-bedroom house behind me. There are going to be 650 homes on this site. It's one of the biggest housing developments on the greenbelt in the southeast.
It will go some way to helping meet the government's target of 200,000 new homes a year by 2017. But Andrew Whitaker, head of policy for the Home Builders Federation, says the government should make it easier to build on brownfield sites in the green belt.
Development within the green belt itself is a very risky business. There's a presumption against inappropriate development, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops and get over a lot of hurdles in order to get a scheme to come forward.
Do you think that it's too strict?
I think what we need to do is look at the whole policy of greenbelt in the planning system. At the moment, we're struggling to find sites to meet housing needs in areas around major conurbations that have greenbelt protection. And maybe it's time after 60 years to look again at how we can best meet housing needs of people in greenbelt constrained areas.
Developers are hoping to build 450 new homes on this site at Fort Halstead near Sevenoaks. Currently the MOD are here, but they're relocating soon, and most of the site, although in the green belt, will be brownfield land when they're gone.
Left alone, these buildings might rot and decay, and that's the last thing the council wants.
Sevenoaks Council is supporting the proposals. Even so, they've faced opposition. Dr. Hilary Newport doesn't think this site is the right place to put new houses.
And we supported sensible reuse of that site for commercial development. We're a bit less supportive of the fact that they're now putting 450 houses in there. The developers say that's the only way it can possibly be economically viable. But I would argue that 450 houses in what is effectively an island in the middle of Greenbelt is not particularly sustainable development, because every one of those householders is going to be reliant upon the private car to access any of the services that they need, or to get their kids to school, or to pop out and buy a pint of milk. So there are circumstances in which regeneration of brownfield sites in Greenbelt are very sensible, but let's do it right.
But whatever the resistance to new houses on the greenbelt, in practice it's already happening. Exclusive research for the BBC by property consultants Glenigan shows that planning approvals have risen tenfold over the last 5 years for greenbelt developments in London boroughs. And not everybody minds. In Sevenoaks, some people do believe that it's time to make changes to the greenbelt policy.
It would have to be obviously considered quite carefully. Yeah, as long as some obviously affordable housing, that's important.
I like the country, I like gardening, I like that, but I've also got adult children that need homes. So it's kind of like, it's a two-way thing, isn't it really? In fairness, they probably need to come out a bit.
Building more houses is the only way of making housing more affordable, and you can only build more houses if you've got land to put them on.
Fields like this are important because of the point of principle. If it's not for CPRE standing up for our green spaces, then frankly very few other people will do. We believe it's important to have planning policy that genuinely delivers the homes that we need, but releasing huge areas of greenfield land isn't going to improve affordability.
Finding solutions to the housing crisis isn't easy. In future, the green belt may be redrawn or even redefined, but for the moment it remains a powerful and popular restriction.